So we do need to cover this. This is important. So even though the judges blocked the federal funding freeze from Trump, the federal funding freeze due to Elon's, going in the Treasury Department and sticking his in it, that's still going on. A lot of NGOs which help provide homeless services or housing or food or medical services to the public, like a lot of these groups are getting really screwed really hard right now, and they don't really understand their future. They can't plan for the future, which means they can't allocate funding, they can't plan operations to do work, and a bunch of people are trying to find out whether or not they're going to lose their job. And again, even if we go in and we undo all the damage, you're losing valuable experience. People who go out there and work for an NGO and dedicate like whatever, how many years, decades of their life to it, and then find out they're just going to be kicked to the curb at the whim, unconstitutionally by the government, only to be brought back in 2 to 4 years later when the courts finally get it under control, or when the administration is kicked to the curb. Then you call it back. You already moved. You already moved on with your life. You already took a job with DuPont Chemical. You already took a job with a company that's going to pay you way more than your civil service job that a lot of it has to be motivated by passion. And that betrayal will take the passion out of you. It'll snap it right out of your chest. And then our institution, not only our institution's best defenders in the civil service are going to be damaged, but this also is true for all of those who are reliant on public grants in order to offer services to the community. I mean, hell, Meals on Wheels was on the choppy block for a second. Anyway, here is an update on the federal funding freeze.
A federal funding freeze announced by the Trump administration last week and blocked by a pair of judges is destabilizing a wide range of programs despite the court interventions. Over the past few days, some health care and Head Start programs report they have sporadically been blocked from funding, forcing some to shut down. Political correspondent Lisa Desjardins has been investigating what's happening and joins us now to share what she has found. So, Lisa, what have you found? Who's being affected here?
Right. NewsHour's been in front on this. I've been doing 3 days of reporting with Ali Rogan as well to figure out what's happening here. And I want to talk about 2 specific areas. One, Head Start programs around the country, and also community health care centers. Both of them are funded in large part through the Department of Health and Human Services, HHS. Here's what we know. There have been funding problems in the last week and day. Head Start programs in 27 states have felt these sporadic funding freezes, many of them still feeling it. Those serve 20,000 kids and families, the affected programs. Now, community health centers in at least 9 states over the past few days have also been blocked from accessing and being able to get their funding. Now, Head Start programs, of course, are focused on early childhood learning and families. Some of them have already spent some of this money and they needed to recoup it as part of
these kids could be learning their A's, their B's, and their C's on the streets. They could be learning it out in the fields, and they could be you can learn your basic math playing dice on the corner. Okay, get those kids out there. Come on. We got to go in there and cut all the wasteful government spending, like keep teaching kids how to read and write.
The program in Washington State, Head Start program.
The thing is, when they concentrate on the bogus, like, oh, hey guys, let's look at this thing that's like $10,000 to include like a gay character comic book representation and like Columbia somewhere. Oh, look at all this wasteful government spending. That's the stuff they're going to do whole segments about on YouTube channels and alt media shows or whatever. And then they're going to ignore the developmental reading programs. They're going to ignore making sure that these kids, when they go to the classroom, they have a full stomach so they can concentrate on learning, building the future, helping to build up our youth. One of the most basic roles as a society is now being undermined by the unconstitutional actions, the blocked because of its obviously questionable legality actions are already having an effect because people don't know if the money's going to keep flowing. And again, when they're going to go on social media, they're going to talk about crazy, like, oh, I heard all the money is being spent on shrimp treadmills or like complete not, and you'll look up and it's like, oh, $500 on some experiment that was done to help improve the like health of people who consume this type of it's nothing. It's nothing in comparison to the real human effect that's having on the ground. That's not going to get the coverage because it's not as lay epic win to talk about, oh, this kid's going to school hungry now.
Have had these blocks. They call them rolling blackouts.
Don't you think free lunches are kind of woke? Don't you,
So this created an incredible amount of chaos and confusion across our community. It meant a lot of programs, even up until yesterday, were worried about paying their rent, paying their staff. And, you know, at the end of the day, what really impacts are the kids and the families. They're the ones that are depending on childcare. And if their childcare is closed, that means they miss work.
And there was a program that had to close in Washington State because of this. Now, I want to stress this is sporadic. Some programs are able to access the funds, some aren't. At the same time, I want to talk about the other major program that we're looking at, the community health centers across this country. Ali Rogan has done incredible reporting here. She documented that it's happened in at least 9 states, and one of them is the state of Virginia, where one center was closed at one point because of the problem. The issue is the payment management services, it's called also PMS, that has these health centers waiting for their funds. One of the CEO in Virginia of the community health centers told us this all has been happening with no warning.
But all of a sudden it went down with no notification, nothing. We had to hear from health centers texting me to let us know, well, we can't get into the PMS system again.
think about that? People are coming in for like checkups, medicine. They're coming in to, you know, solve vital health needs, immediate health needs. People need, if they have certain health problems, they need to check up on those health problems constantly in order to stay alive. And then with no warning, all these services are being shut down. Not only is it inhuman how this stuff is being cut off, but it's also horribly chaotic and unorganized.
So I say that with the asterisk that now we are in a life of uncertainty, and we've never, frankly, ever been in this situation.
Now, an important reminder that community health centers in this country serve 1 in 10 Americans, and they serve 1 in 5 people in rural America.
This comes after the funding freeze proposal, but that has been blocked by the courts. Do we know what's behind these blocks that they're seeing?
We asked HHS because at first it seemed like that's where all of this was coming from. And in fact, for these two groups, that's where the issue is. So let's explain what HHS responded to us with last night and then again today when we asked about community health centers. Wrote us that some payment management system users experienced technical issues last week. The system is back up and running now, but users may be experiencing lags due to the high volume of requests. So they're saying something happened with the system and now they're just trying to process all the people that were backlogged. Well, let's think about this. What we know is last week that funding freeze went in place. Trump administration folks were saying it was not supposed to affect some of these programs, but they did feel it temporarily. So the switch went off, the switch went back on, and now there's a thinking that somehow the system couldn't manage that. However, we don't know for sure that that's the case here because our Laura Barone-Lopez, as she's reported in this very chair many times before, has been asking the Trump administration repeatedly, are you following the court orders that say to reinstate all of this funding? She has not gotten a response. So
By the way, the scenario where the courts tell them to restore the funding and Trump just ignores them, just like, you know, or either drags his feet so he like restores it at the last second, or This is the stuff that scares me. The type of stuff where Trump just ignores the courts, and since it's the Department of Justice that is supposed to be in charge of enforcing the law, and we're getting people like what? Pam Bondi to be the possible future Attorney General, hardcore Trump loyalist. I mean, she came after Matt Gaetz. Matt Gaetz was chosen because he was vulnerable and he had no choice to be loyal for Trump if he wanted to survive in the political environment. It still was not enough for him because he was just too dirty, too sticky to even get through that Senate. They're probably going to be able to get Tulsi and RFK through, which just shows you how bad he was. But Pam Bondi is still a hardcore loyalist. And so if Trump just looks at these courts and he says, bite me, and then tries to have the Attorney General back them up, I mean, this could become a real crisis of our democracy. Now, so far, it hasn't been a staunch no. He's not answering questions. But the question is always going to be about stopping Trump because if you don't stop him, once he starts to slide into these areas, he'll do it if he thinks he can get away with it. It's just a question of him thinking he can get away with it. If he thinks he can get away with it and just not restore the funding, courts be damned, he'd immediately do this. This is the guy who said that after he lost the election, that the Constitution should be suspended just to reinstitute him into power. Of course he would do it if he can get away with it. So it's a question of making sure that there's enough public backlash to these types of actions that he knows it's going to hurt him enough in the polls that it could hurt him in 2 years, that could hurt his power base, that it could hurt his branding. He doesn't like how it's being talked about in the media, that he's losing the public narrative. He's losing the focus game. So I think that's something that can hurt him. But also, of course, you know, we got to hope that the legal system holds up. We need to make sure that we're vigilant in having the legal system hold up. I mean, it was a Reagan era appointee that ended up kicking down his executive order trying to revoke birthright citizenship. And he basically, you know, was almost laughing in their face at how obvious unconstitutional it is. And it's going to be up to people like those in positions of power in order to stop this full court press to just see if he can ignore the courts, do as much at the same time as possible, and overwhelm the system.
Really don't know exactly what's happening behind the scenes.
At the same time, we know the funding freeze is affecting many of those programs who have had funding restored. So what about the wider programs that have felt the same jolt?
Right. It's important to know there's a universe of programs that are concerned here about grants and ultimate funding. Some of them are individual tailored, like Women's Infant and Children program that helps mothers and fathers who are dealing with low income salaries. And one of those we talked to is a woman named Sarah Manassara, who lives in New York City. She's got a 2-year-old and a 6-year-old. And she said she really depends on the eggs and the other healthy foods that she can get from WIC. And last week, that funding grant pause, the fear about it, really put her in a bad situation, really fearful because so much for her is at stake.
Threatening to take away literally fruits and vegetables, eggs, milk and formula from babies is really the worst thing I can think of, and it's not acceptable. So it's not only about the stress, it's also about being able to maintain our health, and it's about us being able to live and survive. So that's really what's at stake here.
She's still funded, but it's a climate of fear. Trump allies have said that's the kind of program that they want to look at.
You've also been looking at a number of other programs.
Just to emphasize how chaotic it is and where their funding priorities are, Elon Musk, when he took over these institutions, just like he took over Twitter, he headed the email when he sent it out, a fork in the road. Oh, we're going a different path now. And he gave people, just like at Twitter, he gave them an opportunity to just quit and take a just down payment, basically, hey, here's some money, you'll quit, you'll get paid for these many months, and go. He did the same thing with basically every federal government employee. All these people with so much experience, like decades and decades and decades of experience, he was just like, you want to quit right now? We'll let you quit. You'll get a few months pay up until about September, and then you're free to go, and you won't have to do any work in that time. You can quit. You'll be paid till September, your dues, and then you can go work in the private sector. Go work for DuPont Chemical. Get paid more than you were working in the working as a civil servant anyway. There's just two problems. Number one, do you have the legal authority to do that? And number two, does he have the funding allocated in order to make these payments that he's saying he's going to be able to make, as well as replace the government employees who are going to take that opportunity, immediately leave their job, but are in key positions that work in our federal government, and we need people to do those jobs, because I know bureaucracy looks like a big, like lumbering machine from a distance, but you start taking out different critical gears, you know, the machine starts to fall apart. And so not only was it unorganized, not only was it chaotic, not only is it just scrapping so much experience, but also it didn't even have the funds allocated for the things he was saying he could do. Like, there's no money allocated for this money that he's saying that they're going to pay out. He was just promising money that they haven't got yet. They haven't even been given by Congress, money that might not even ever come around.
Climate of fear, Trump allies have said that's the kind of program that they want to look at.
You've also been looking at a number of other programs in government and out under scrutiny because of the Trump administration's efforts to end diversity, equity, and inclusion programs. What's the latest?
It's not really clear what's applying there, and we know that programs around the country are having unexplained blocks on some of these, and outside of HHS, that they think may be related to these DEI executive orders. Now, one program we talked to was a domestic abuse shelter. Kyle Maduro spoke to them in Pennsylvania, and the manager there, Lauren Peterson, said DEI for them means that they are including everyone, especially vulnerable populations. They have a DEI site site on their website. And she said, it's important for us that we make sure to include everyone. That's a big stake item for us. Meanwhile, we know that there are problems in funding elsewhere, including with some mental health programs, some substance abuse programs, DHS, USDA, all of these unexplained funding blocks that we're watching very carefully.
So the current hope is amongst the NGOs that are, some of which are receiving funding, some of which are not, you know, it's kind of all over the place. People don't know if they're going to continue to receive funding because Trump is kind of just like kind of eyeballing the courts and we're just waiting to see what happens. But the hope is that the judge will continue to block it. It's supposed to be reviewed, I hear, again on Monday is, I think, the next like review, if I remember correctly. But the hope is that the judge will block it until about March 14th, when a continuing budget resolution deadline is supposed to come around again, and therefore the next budget is supposed to be approved, the budget for the future. And then with that budget allocated for each department, everybody will know how much money they're getting, and then everyone should be fine. But the problem is they should be fine right now. The problem with this is that they throw a wrench into the system right now. It wasn't like, oh, everybody ran out of money, quick, what are we going to do? They're going in there and they're stopping the money flows, even though it's been allocated by Congress. They are usurping the constitutionally Article 1 mandated power of the purse from Congress. That's what they're doing. And so if Congress uses that power of the purse to then assert their budgets again in March, but there's no consequences for this now, what stops them from doing the same thing then? Swift implementation of the law now would be a start. If you guys can just all go home, you can hug your grandmothers, you can hug your mothers, you can just have a good weekend. And you can get off the internet. Not before going to DylanBurns.tv, donating and subscribing to support more freelance war journalism in Ukraine.